I would like to introduce Akinyele Thompson. Akinyele is a lifelong learner who's always trying to learn something new, find new ways to improve. He's always trying to find more optimal ways to do things, whether in a code base, a product, or a feature he's building. He believes in writing quality code, researching the best solutions for the task, creating stable architectures, and optimizing for the best performance, as well as understanding when the best time is to address technical debt to produce quality products. Outside of work, Akinyele enjoys traveling, large bodies of water, and going for a jog to clear his head after a productive day. You'll always find him spending time with his family and friends, playing games, watching shows. He's just like you folks, and he's here to tell you, answer some common questions about React Native. Akinyele, take it away.
So today, what I'll be going through is just basically common questions about React Native. Give you like a simple intro to what React Native is, and if you're interested in using it in your development or your team, this is like great intro. So if you've ever been curious about what React Native is or what hybrid development is, just stay tuned and it should kind of get you on board and up to speed. Common questions asked about React Native. I mean, the first one is, what is React Native? We've heard about React Native, but don't know really what it is. You've heard about things like hybrid development, mobile development. So React Native is basically an open source mobile application framework that was created by Facebook, or should I say Meta. It allows developers to build mobile applications using only JavaScript and React. As one thing to note about React Native, it's built on the backbone of React, so the same paradigms that are used in React is basically carried over to React Native. So it's basically the same folks that React Native, they wanted to be able to have like mobile applications, and they created React Native. We all know React is basically one of the most popular JavaScript frameworks out there. A lot of people should kind of feel at home or should feel safe in using React Native because it's basically the same territory. Next, the next question is like, what are the advantages of using React Native? Yes, we know it's a mobile application framework, but why should we use it? Like, what's the good thing about this? What's the good thing about React Native? There are other frameworks out there. Well, firstly, with a hybrid framework, it kind of gives you a faster development time compared to traditional applications. How does it do that? Through its cross-platforms capabilities. So essentially, you have one code base and you're able to deploy for both iOS and Android through the one code base. So you're able to kind of save a lot of development time. So you're not developing multiple applications, or you don't have multiple code bases for your different applications, such as Android, iOS, or web. You'd have the one code base that can be used for all of your mobile applications. And in some instances, you can carry over your web logic or your mobile logic to your application in your web workspace, because it's still React at the end of the day. I'll have examples later on the slide to kind of show you guys how similar it is to React, if for those that are familiar with React or even JavaScript. Yeah, so that's basically two good advantages already that React Native brings. React Native also kind of gives you hot reloading compared to native development, where whenever you change something, you have to kind of like recompile and then rebuild just to see your changes. Because React Native is kind of built in a more hybrid workspace, your changes basically show immediately. Any change that you have, whether it's logical or visual, your changes are displayed immediately. So you get the benefits of hot reloading. So you have more development time, less downtime. And then lastly, React Native, as I said earlier, has a large community behind it because it's backed by Meta and it's open source. And it's been out for a while now. So any issues that you have or any issues that you may run into has probably been solved already by the open source community. And if it's something that you're finding, support there is really good for it. As you can see, React Native has like over 1 million weekly downloads. So people are really interested in this, and it's constantly growing. The community is growing, and Meta is always improving the technology. So it's come up a far way to where it is now. All right. Next thing we'd want to ask is, how does one get started with React Native? So yeah, you know what React Native is, you know that it's advantage, you know the advantages that it would bring. But like, you're new to React Native, how do you get started? You're interested in it, you're sold. Well, the first thing I would do if I'm completely new to React, I would head over to the React dev documentation or the React dev.learn. So that's essentially the React open source documentation that kind of carries you through React Native or React on a whole. And then once you're familiar with React, once you go through everything here, once you go through the quick intro that kind of teach you what React is, once you are able to build a simple application in React, and you learn the basic paradigms in React, once you're kind of comfortable there, I'd say you're 90% ready for React Native. There's not much else for you to do to get into React Native. You just need to kind of get familiar with React. If you're unfamiliar with JavaScript, just get familiar with JavaScript and then React, and then you're basically ready for React Native. And I'll kind of show you what those differences are, what the other 10% is. So after you kind of learn React and you're comfortable in that space, what you do then now, you want to kind of set up your environment for React Native. You'd have to ensure that you have your npm and your node, and you'd have to install Node.js, and you have your package manager, which would be npm. And from that, you're basically ready. What I would do, I would use Expo. Expo is basically a grouping of tools that's used to kind of create mobile applications, such as React Native. So it's a CLI tool that essentially can get you up and running in no time. Once you have the Expo CLI installed, you don't even need to install Expo CLI. You can use the npx executable that is essentially just runs an npm package. You can just do the npx, create Expo app, and then the name of your application, and then boom, you have a React Native application ready to be used. I'll show you an example of that here. So here you can see me essentially kind of creating an example React Native project with Expo installed. I just essentially do npx create Expo app beginner. And then less than a minute, I have a very basic React Native application running. And then you just have to ensure that you have your iOS simulator running. So you have to install Xcode and stuff like that. And for Android, you have to ensure that you have like a JDK environment set up. But as long as those environments are set up, you're basically ready. You can, after that, you just go into your folder, your project folder, and then run an npm run Android or iOS. I did an npm run iOS, and then that essentially starts your project with an iOS application in your simulator. So you're basically 95% now. All right, maybe I'm going a lot of percentage, but you can see how easy it is as a React developer or as somebody that's comfortable with React to kind of just jump into React Native. Let's talk about what else do you need to know to basically be able to do React Native development. All right, so let me show you what the differences are. React Native components. So similar to React Native uses components to build UI elements. And similar to React Native kind of introduces that building block paradigm where you kind of have your small elements and you use them to build complex UI. It's the same background, same React Native. Well, similar, not same. The differences between React Native elements, though, is that they have different base elements. Where in React Native, you'd have your HTML elements, you'd have like a div, you'd have like a paragraph, you'd have a header and so forth, and links. Your base elements in React Native are different. So the div would be a view in React Native. Header would be like a text in React Native. And then you have your own custom elements, which would be buttons and images and text inputs and so on and so forth. So how these work is that because React Native has to build to an Android and an iOS device, these custom elements or these base elements is what maps back to those elements in the native space. So in Android, a text is different from what it is on iOS, but the text element essentially does the job of rendering those different elements in those different native environments for us. So we don't have to worry about what element is being rendered. React Native kind of handles that for us. Now I would say you're probably just you're 95% of, with this alone, you're probably 95% because there's not much difference. You just kind of have to know the default elements. And when you're context switching from React to React Native, you got to know that you're using a view, not a div. A text, not a header. What else is different? So the next thing is different. You probably noticed this if you're looking at the code before. Styling in React Native is different. So in React, you have our CSS is kind of different. In an HTML environment or in the web environment, we use a kebab case to style, but for React Native, we use camel case. And and in React Native, we have units instead of pixels. So if you take a look at the code to the right here, you'd see our view here, the style is imported in the same way as it would be in React Native, where you have an object, and then where you have, no, it wouldn't be an object, sorry. But if you look at the style properties here, it's essentially for the font size, you have font size that's in camel case, and then you have 17 instead of 17 pixels. That's essentially the other difference. Your CSS is different, but you also need to know that certain CSS properties aren't carried over to React Native, so you don't have things like grids or animation in your CSS. There's like a smaller subset of CSS that React Native supports. But once you're familiar with all of those style properties or CSS properties, you can still do all of what you need to do in your mobile or your native application. But it's just to kind of support mobile space because the phone is different from a browser. And if you have a good IDE that kind of gives you all the linting, you'll see all of the CSS properties that React Native does provide. Now you're probably at like 98% right now. Now, other thing that React Native does differently is handling user inputs. For this, it's essentially just using the property, using the correct element. If you look to the right here, React Native provides a central component such as text input. It works the same way as it does as an input field or in React, where you'd have your placeholder, your on text change. The only thing that's different is just the component. So just the base component is changing. It still follows the event handler pattern that's still carried over, where you handle the change and then you update your state. So if you're familiar with React, you should notice that there's not much difference here than just the base component. You still have your state, you still have your event handlers, and you still have your stylings, but the styles done differently. And that's just to kind of show you the similarities and the difference, or React Native kind of in action, and what those differences would kind of look like when you start to build out your components and add states and stuff like that. Another difference with React Native is how navigation works. Now, navigation in a mobile space is kind of different than a web space, because with React Native navigation refers to like how you move through each screens or pages. That's the screens. Where in the web space, when you move to a different, I guess, a link, or everything would kind of reload. Where React Native, it still works kind of the same way, but you have screens instead of pages. Now, for React Native, one of the most popular navigation library that's used is React Navigation. I'd say a majority of applications are using it. You do have other navigation libraries out there, but I'd say React Navigation is to React Native what React Router is to React, or navigation in React Native. There are different kinds of navigation. The top three would be a stack navigator, a tab navigator, and a draw navigator. For each of these, navigation has different behaviors. And that's where React Native kind of starts to differ from the web space. Your how you navigate kind of is defined or governed based on the type of navigator that you have. So for a stack navigator, each time you navigate somewhere, it would kind of work like a web page, where when you go somewhere, your history becomes your stack. So a stack navigator is kind of like regular navigation in the web, and you can kind of go back in the stack, or you can go back certain distances in the stack. But for a tab navigator, all of your tabs would be kind of rendered, or the next tab relevant to the tab that is beside the tab that you're on. If you look at the example here, you have a tab navigator on the right. Both of these tabs are kind of loaded, the home and the details page, and just clicking on the tab kind of navigates you, switch over to that tab. But one thing to note though with React Native is that both of these tabs are kind of rendered at the same time. And then they're kind of managed by the tab navigator. Then for our draw navigator, I'm sure we've all had using the application, and we have our hamburger menu in the top left corner of your screen, and you tap that and you see the list of pages or screens that you can go to. That's essentially the same, and React navigation manages all of that. As much as there are differences, there's still similarities, but you kind of just have to get used to the navigational experience in React Native. You wouldn't like link to a URL, you'd link to a page, you'd go to the name of the page. Here we have the stack navigator on the left and a tab navigator on the right. It's essentially the same thing, but if you notice, for the stack, we're kind of creating a stack navigator, but on the right, we're creating a tab navigator, and the stack navigator is still at the top, but it's just not being used. So it's really simple to kind of change your navigational behavior with React navigation. Here we have our screens, our home screen and our detail screen, and then we just kind of put them in our stack navigator. And the same thing applies here. If you look, you have the name of the screen. One thing to pay attention to is the name of the screen. You don't have a route here, you'd have like a name. And then, well, what you do here is just on a screen, with React navigation, all of the screens that are wrapped in our navigation wrapper, it's past a prop called a navigation prop that kind of manages navigation. And with that navigation prop, you have a navigate method that you just need to kind of pass in the name of the screen. You can do additional thing like passing props that would be kind of parsed out inside along with your inside the navigation object. It's as simple as just on press, have our event handler send the user to the name of the page. And the only thing that needs to happen is that this page needs to have the same name as your screen that was rendered before. And that's essentially navigation in React Native. You can get more complex than this, but at the very simplest stage, that's what navigation or how navigation would be in React Native. Finally, we would want to ask yourself, since we're in like a native experience now, how do we debug issues? Like, how does that work in a native application or a native workspace on your mobile device? So yes, there are differences, but it's still possible. If you're using Expo kind of provides you with a lot of tools, but React Native does support a lot of tool sets that allows you to debug. You have React Native Debugger, you have Expo, which is also an example of how Expo allows you to debug. And you have Chrome Developer Tools, and you have other third-party software like Flippo that allows you to plug into your mobile application, give you relative debugging info. So with Expo provides you with a debugger, and Expo provides you with a inspector that kind of allows you to inspect elements, your performance, your network, and just touchable elements on the screen. So with Expo alone, you're able to kind of still able to debug a lot or look into whatever your issues may be in your application. As much as it's different, you're still able to get like your console logs or see your crashes, and you're able to inspect. At the very least, only thing you wouldn't be able to do is just have like debugging where you have like a breakpoint and stuff like that. It's kind of different in this environment. I don't think Expo would allow you to do that, but there are other third-party things that you can do. And if your IDE supports it, you still can set like breakpoints and stuff like that. You guys can also look into the other things like Flipper and the React Native debugger. Those also kind of gives you a nice debugging experience. And I would say that is it. So just to kind of wrap up, React Native is a powerful mobile framework. It offers several advantages over traditional native app development, including faster development time, and has a large community. And as long as you know React, you're like 90% there of the way. Thanks.